The moment Alex Eala dropped her racket at the 2026 WTA Tour, the entire Philippine press section broke down in tears. But ESPN and the major broadcast networks completely misunderstood the reason behind those tears. The commentators assumed it was just the raw emotion of a young athlete achieving a massive milestone. They thought the reporters were simply reacting to a historic victory for their home country. They were wrong. Completely wrong. They did not cry because of a title. They did not cry because of ranking points or prize money. They cried because they were the only people in that massive stadium who knew exactly what Alex had sacrificed in the dark. You see, the high-definition cameras only showed a young girl celebrating the biggest win of her career. What those lenses failed to capture was a silent pact she made with herself exactly 6 months ago. A secret tactical and mental burden she carried alone while the rest of the tennis world just watched her hit forehands and backhands. This was not just another inspiring underdog story on the professional tour. This was a calculated survival mechanism. We are talking about a fundamental shift in how she approached the game of tennis. Most casual fans tune in just to see the final score and the shiny trophy presentation. They miss the invisible wars fought long before the players even step onto the court. The reporters from Manila and Cebu sitting in that press box had followed her journey since she was a teenager. They knew her family, they knew her struggles, and they recognized the silent suffering etched onto her face during those brutal third sets. They understood that the victory they were witnessing was born from a ruthless decision that no 21-year-old should ever have to make. Today we are going back to the beginning of this silent pact. We are going to look at the exact blueprint of how she transformed a crushing vulnerability into the ultimate weapon. To understand the sheer magnitude of this secret, you first have to look at the incredibly brutal landscape of the 2026 WTA Tour. This was not a normal season by any stretch of the imagination. This was an absolute battleground where even established veterans were getting crushed by the daily physical grind. The modern female tennis game has evolved into an arms race of sheer power. Opponents are hitting the ball heavier and serving with terrifying velocity. When you look across the net at players like Sabalenka or Goff, you realize that pure technique is no longer enough to survive. You need overwhelming physicality. The schedule itself is unforgiving. We are talking about a relentless grind of tournaments across different continents, shifting time zones, and brutal court conditions. For most athletes coming from the United States or Europe, the pressure of the tour is primarily about personal legacy. It is about climbing the rankings, securing lucrative sponsorship deals, and proving something to themselves. If they lose a first-round match in Miami, life goes on. They pack their bags and head to the next city. But Alex Eala stepped onto the hard courts this year carrying a completely different kind of weight. She is not just playing for a ranking or a paycheck. She is the undisputed leading hope of an entire region. When she steps up to the baseline to serve, it is not just her coaching box holding their breath. It is over 100 million people back in the Philippines. They wake up at 3 in the morning, gather around small glowing screens, and tie their collective national pride directly to her racket. Imagine the crushing gravity of that expectation. You are out there entirely alone on a massive stadium court under the glaring lights. You miss a crucial break point and you feel like you just let down an entire nation. It is the exact kind of immense pressure that usually destroys young prodigies before their careers even truly take off. We have seen the blueprint of failure so many times before. The media hypes up a young star, the national expectations become suffocating, and the player simply collapses under the enormous weight. Alex was staring right down the barrel of that exact same tragic fate. She knew her natural physical frame was a massive disadvantage against the tall power hitters dominating the tour. She is not a naturally towering figure. She cannot rely on a massive first serve to bail her out of trouble when she is down in a game. She realized very early in the season that she could not win by simply trading heavy blows from the baseline. She could not outmuscle the giants on the other side of the net. She needed a completely different weapon. A weapon that demanded a level of sacrifice most professional athletes would flat out refuse to make. If you feel that same intense pride watching an athlete push beyond all human limits to carry the hopes of their nation, subscribe to the channel so we can continue uncovering these powerful hidden stories together. Because what Alex decided to do next defies every conventional rule of tennis training. This is the exact detail that every major sports network completely missed. Beginning in January of the season, Alex quietly began reconstructing her entire biomechanical foundation. If you watch the slow-motion replays from her earlier years, you see a very traditional baseline game. But against the heavy hitters of the modern era, she knew she needed more kinetic energy. She needed a way to generate massive pace without a tall physical frame. To achieve this, she altered the exact way she plants her back foot on the hard courts. She started driving all of her body weight through a much deeper knee bend on every single heavy forehand. This is not a standard tactical adjustment. This is a radical physiological gamble. It is a movement pattern that generates incredible topspin, but it places a terrifying amount of shear force directly onto the joints. Any orthopedic specialist will tell you that this specific type of dynamic loading can absolutely shred the knees of a young athlete over a long, grueling season. She knew the severe risks involved. She embraced the inevitable physical damage because she desperately needed an equalizer. And the data from the early hardcourt tournaments shows exactly how effective this brutal strategy was. Before this season, her win rate in grinding baseline rallies extending past 9 shots was completely average. But at the peak of the tour, that specific metric skyrocketed to an unbelievable 68%. She was no longer just pushing the ball back over the net. She was absorbing the heavy blows of top 10 players and redirecting that pace with punishing sharp angles. She became a human backboard, but you do not get something for nothing in professional tennis. The cost of this kinetic reconstruction was agonizingly high. Picture the brutal quarterfinal match under the blistering afternoon sun. The humidity is completely suffocating. She is down a break in the deciding third set. The rally extends to 12 shots, then 15, then 22. The opponent hits a crushing inside-out forehand that looks like a guaranteed clean winner. Alex explodes out of the far corner. She plants that back foot with that deep, agonizing bend and fires a perfect passing shot down the line to save the entire match. The crowd erupts into absolute pure chaos. The broadcast commentators scream into their microphones about her incredible fighting spirit. But look closely at the zoomed-in camera angle on her face right after the ball bounces twice. She does not smile at all. She does not pump her fist to the crowd. Her jaw is clenched tightly and her eyes squeeze shut for just a fraction of a second. It is a micro-expression of pure, unadulterated physical pain. That is exactly what the reporters from her home country saw from the press box above. They saw the grimace that the live television broadcast quickly cut away from. They knew that behind the scenes her post-match recovery routines had become excruciating. Hours of freezing ice baths. Endless painful physical therapy sessions just to reduce the severe joint inflammation enough so she could physically walk onto the court the very next day. She was literally sacrificing her body point by agonizing point just to stay in the fight against players who were naturally much stronger. It was a level of physical martyrdom that commanded absolute silent respect. But the physical suffering is only the first layer of this incredibly complex story. The agonizing pain she endured in her knees and ankles was completely overshadowed by what was happening inside her mind. The real secret, the exact reason those seasoned journalists completely broke down in tears, has nothing to do with biomechanics. It lies in a silent psychological pact she made with herself. Every standard manual of sports psychology tells an athlete the exact same thing. Shut out the outside noise, ignore the loud crowd. Forget about the massive expectations of your country and focus strictly on the yellow ball. Mental coaches spend years training young prodigies to build an invisible protective wall around themselves to block out the overwhelming pressure. Because if you let the heavy weight of national expectation into your mind, it will usually crush you completely. It will make your arm heavy and your footwork incredibly slow. We have seen it destroy countless careers. But Alex looked at that psychological playbook and threw it completely away. She did something entirely counterintuitive. She did something so incredibly dangerous that no sane coach would ever recommend it. She did not try to block out the 100 million people watching her back home. She absorbed them. She took the terrifying, crushing weight of being the sole tennis hope of the Philippines and deliberately forged it into a mental armor. Psychologists call this a guardian mindset. When you play only for yourself, your brain has a built-in safety mechanism. When the physical pain becomes too severe or the opponent becomes too intimidating, your subconscious gives you permission to quit. You tell yourself it is just not your day. You accept the painful loss and move on to the next tournament. But when you truly believe that you are fighting to protect the pride of your people, that safety mechanism completely vanishes. You are no longer an individual athlete chasing a shiny trophy. You become a fierce protector. And a protector does not have the luxury of giving up simply because they are exhausted. This is the exact moment everything changed for her mentally. She transformed her greatest vulnerability into an unlimited source of dark energy. Have you ever experienced a moment in your own life where immense pressure forced you to unlock a level of resilience you never knew you had? Take a second and let me know down in the comments if you think you could carry the weight of an entire nation without completely breaking down. It requires a level of mental conditioning that most of us simply cannot even comprehend. You can clearly see this guardian mindset activate during the most critical breakpoints of the tour. The deeper she went into the deciding sets, the more terrifyingly calm she became. Look at the decisive tiebreak against one of the most aggressive players on the tour. The opponent is trying absolutely everything to dominate the atmosphere. She is grunting loudly with every single ground stroke. She is staring Alex down across the net with pure aggression. She is screaming out loud after every unforced error, trying to break the spirit of the young rising star. It is a chaotic, loud, and deeply intimidating display of physical dominance. And exactly how does Alex respond? Absolute dead silence. She does not yell back at all. She does not look up at the scoreboard. Between points, she simply adjusts her strings and looks up calmly at the upper deck, where the Philippine flag is draped over the railing. That eerie silence was louder than any scream. It was the terrifying composure of a young woman who had fully accepted her brutal fate. She was not playing tennis to win a simple tennis match anymore. She was executing a vital mission. The opponent was feeding on ego and adrenaline, but Alex was operating on something far deeper and far more permanent. She had weaponized the very pressure that was supposed to destroy her career. She took the fear of failure and turned it into an absolute refusal to surrender the court. When you realize that she turned the unbearable burden of a nation into an invincible psychological shield, you finally understand the tears in the press box. Those journalists were not watching a normal tennis match. They were watching a 21-year-old girl willingly carry a massive cross for her country with absolute stunning grace. They were watching a masterclass in psychological warfare. But a guardian mindset and an incredibly high pain tolerance are just abstract concepts without hard results. How did this silent pact actually hold up against the undeniable statistical reality of the professional circuit? You might think this sounds like a romanticized theory, but the raw data from her three biggest matches of the year tells a story that is even more shocking than the theory itself. You might think this is just some romanticized theory, but look at the hard data from her three most intense matches at this tournament. The numbers simply do not lie. When you compare the statistics of Alex to the rest of the top 10 players on the professional tour, you see a glaring anomaly. In standard service games, she holds her serve at a fairly normal rate. Her baseline metrics during low-stakes points look entirely human. But the moment the score drops to break point against her, a complete transformation occurs. Let us look closely at the quarterfinal, the semifinal, and that brutal championship match. Across those three defining contests, she faced 24 separate breakpoints. These are moments where a single mistake means losing the momentum entirely. She saved 21 of them. That is an 87% survival rate in the most high-pressure situations imaginable. To give you some context, the absolute best players in the world usually hover around 60% in those exact same high-stakes scenarios. She was not merely playing better tennis. She was elevating her level of tactical execution exactly when the psychological pressure was at its absolute highest peak. The heavier the burden became, the more precise and punishing her shots landed. Take a deeper dive into the second set of that grueling semifinal. She was exhausted. Her footwork was visibly slowing down due to the extreme heat on the hard court. The opponent had earned 3 consecutive breakpoints. A normal player would likely panic. A normal player would try to play it safe and wait for an unforced error from the other side of the net. Alex did the exact opposite. She fired a 105-mile-per-hour second serve directly down the center line to wipe away the first breakpoint. On the next point, she engaged in a brutal 25-shot rally before hitting a screaming forehand winner cross-court. It was an act of pure defiance. She dared her opponent to beat her cleanly, and the opponent simply folded under the sheer audacity of her resistance. This pattern repeated over and over again. Every time the door to defeat cracked open, she slammed it shut with a level of aggression that made absolutely no logical sense for a player her size. But there is a specific detail from the championship match that nobody watching on standard television ever noticed. This is the ultimate proof of her silent psychological armor. If you zoom in tightly on the isolated baseline camera feed, you can catch something incredible right before she hits the final serving motion. She does not look at the yellow ball. She does not look at the opponent pacing intensely across the net. She briefly looks up toward her coaching box and taps her left shoulder exactly 2 times. It is a tiny, fleeting motion, a secret physical trigger known only to her closest inner circle. She was not asking her coach for tactical advice on where to place the serve. She was actively acknowledging the massive weight she was carrying. She was signaling to her team that the Guardian mindset was fully activated, and she was ready to endure absolutely whatever physical pain was required to win that final point. That simple tap on the shoulder was a silent, solemn promise to a nation watching thousands of miles away. It meant she was absolutely refusing to break. She shattered the will of the top-ranked players in the world, not with overpowering genetic strength, but with an unbreakable, impenetrable mind. So how exactly does this silent revolution reshape the entire landscape of professional tennis today? The tears shed by the Philippine media that afternoon were not just for a historic athletic victory. It was the exact moment they realized their bright child prodigy had truly evolved into an immortal warrior on the court. They cried because they finally understood the terrifying solitary sacrifice she had been making in the dark all season long. To carry the massive hopes of an entire nation on your shoulders, you have to systematically strip away your own personal fear. You have to replace the natural anxiety of losing with a ruthless, unwavering sense of duty. A 21-year-old girl took the crushing, terrifying pressure of a developing country and deliberately forged it into the ultimate weapon of professional survival. Alex Eala is no longer just a rising star navigating the difficult ranks. She has completely rewritten the strategic blueprint for every single Asian athlete stepping onto the global stage. She proved to the entire sporting world that you do not need the tallest frame or the most powerful genetic muscles to dominate the modern brutal game. You just need a psychological foundation that absolutely refuses to crack under extreme heat. This revelation sends a chilling warning to every single player currently ranked above her. How do you possibly defeat an opponent who does not fear losing anymore? How do you break a player who draws unlimited dark energy from the very pressure that is supposed to destroy her spirit? The rest of the professional tour is now forced to head back to the drawing board to figure out a way to break through this impenetrable armor. But the real burning question is how long her human body can physically sustain this brutal level of kinetic sacrifice. The massive upcoming Grand Slam tournament will test the absolute breaking point of her new biomechanical movement and her psychological shield. The entire tennis world will be watching closely to see if this incredible armor holds together over a grueling 2-week major event against the absolute best in the world. Will she conquer the biggest global stage, or will the accumulated physical toll finally demand its devastating payment? You definitely do not want to miss how this extraordinary historical saga unfolds. Hit the subscribe button right now, so you will be here with us when we break down all the dramatic answers during her next massive tournament run.